With demand for GameCube games on the Nintendo Switch being as high as ever, Capcom decided that since Nintendo's avoiding it harder than my parents avoided me at the Youth Chili Cook-Off, now's as good a time as any to step in by delivering 3 of that console's most popular games with the Resident Evil remake, Resident Evil 0, and Resident Evil 4. But instead of rejoicing, many people, including my fat ass, are none too happy at the fact that half of the physical copy for the remake and 0 is actually a digital download. Plus, Resident Evil 4 is just straight up digital, and worst of all, it doesn't even have the motion controls offered in the Wii version. And all this botchery has people wondering why Capcom would be buttholes and ruin something that could have been amazing. So make yourself a Jill sandwich, wash it down with a glass of freshly squeezed bull juice, press the subscribe button if you haven't already, and allow me, the master of unlocking Cameron, to tell you why Capcom ruined the Switch releases of Resident Evil 0, 1, and 4. As lame as it is for the bundle of Resident Evil 0 and 1 to have a physical copy of a digital download, I've gotta say, I'm really not all that surprised. After all, this is Capcom we're talking about here. They're still making some really high-quality games, but they wouldn't even put both Mega Man Anniversary collections on one cartridge, despite the combined file sizes being less than 4 gigabytes. And need I remind you about the Resident Evil Revelations, quote, bundle? I've been told that one Switch cartridge isn't capable of loading 2 separate games, but Capcom could have just combined them all into one file with like 5 minutes of work. But nah, they'd rather be dicks and take people's rights away to resell their games. And I get that they're a business and need to try to fight the used games market, but come on Capcom, there's better ways to do that, you know. Even though it'd have been better for Resident Evil 0 and 1 to be on one cartridge, and while we're at it, Resident Evil Revelations 1 and 2, it's still not as bad as the Mega Man Legacy collections, because the combined file sizes to both of these Resident Evil bundles would have required the 32GB Switch cartridge, which is the biggest and most expensive one to produce. So even though it would have been way better if there were just separate physical copies for each game, part of the blame lies on Nintendo for making the cartridges so expensive in the first place. But then again, if the games are Switch taxed at $30 each, then Capcom should have used the extra money to give us proper releases. Because these games costing so much kinda feels like you're driving on a highway with an expensive toll that still has potholes. Not that many people are really complaining about the half-and-half releases though, because we all kinda knew what the deal was as soon as the games were announced. But what really surprised people is Resident Evil 4's Switch release. Not because it didn't get a physical, because even though it'd have been nice to have a hard copy, there's nothing wrong with digital games. I mean, they're way better than buying a cartridge with the download code after all. The thing about Resident Evil 4's Switch release that's got people's potatoes so steamed up though is the fact that the motion controls from the Wii version are missing. But to be completely honest, I'm really kinda blown away that this is an issue with people. Don't get me wrong, I loved aiming with the Wii remote and using motion controls for QuickTime events. In fact, that's actually my favorite way to play, and I think the absence of this control scheme prevents the Switch version from being considered definitive. But I have no idea why people were actually expecting the Switch port to have these controls, because the technology in the Joy-Cons is completely different from the Wii remote. Playing Resident Evil 4 with the Wii remote relied on the pointer and sensor bar, whereas aiming with the bow in Breath of the Wild's done with gyroscopic controls. I'm not saying Resident Evil 4 couldn't have been reworked to utilize these gyro controls, but if Capcom didn't reconfigure the PS3 version to be compatible with the Move, then I'm not surprised they didn't go through a considerable amount of extra work for the Switch port. Because if they did, then the motion and pointer controls would have definitely been hyped up beforehand. And the issue of reconfiguring the Wiimote's pointer controls to work with the Joy-Con's gyro controls is probably why we aren't seeing Wii games coming to the Switch. Sometimes the Wii's got a bad reputation of being a gimmick, but games that were designed around motion, and more specifically pointer controls, were actually a lot of fun. So it's a bit of a shame that games with these kinds of controls might never see the light of day again. Because unlike porting pretty much every other game that's ever existed to the Switch, it's not a matter of copy and pasting. I know a lot of people are probably thinking that since Capcom converted the pointer controls of Okami to gyro, then there really should be no excuse. But aiming with a weapon requires a lot more precision than using the Celestial brush. So even if Capcom half-assed the gyro controls in Okami, nobody would have even noticed it anyway, given that you can't really screw it up. Even games that actually did use gyro controls with the Wii Motion Plus aren't the exact same thing despite being so similar. And I'm pretty sure that when the Legend of Zelda producer Eiji Aonuma teased a Skyward Sword port of a Zelda Symphony, Nintendo probably gave him a good ass-whooping afterwards for getting people's hopes up. That Wii game in particular, along with many others, would certainly sell out the ass with HD remakes on the Switch. But unlike the Wii U that had a sensor bar and was compatible with the Wii Remote, the Switch just can't accommodate it. Which is why I've been a little skeptical about the heavily rumored port for the Metroid Prime trilogy that a lot of people swear is coming. I'm not saying it won't happen, but if Retro Studios really goes through the trouble of reconfiguring everything, then not only do I hope that means Metroid Prime 4 will utilize a similar control scheme, but I really hope a trilogy port sells out the ass so we can get games like Mario Galaxy. If Nintendo still hasn't given us GameCube games that were remade for the 3DS while the Switch was out though, then I'm not holding my breath for any first-party Wii ports. As far as third parties go though, it would be really nice if games like Resident Evil 4 had a little extra work put into them to accommodate pointer controls, even if they do play just fine without them. Because after using those kinds of controls for games like Metroid Prime Prime, Pikmin, and of course Resident Evil 4. It just kinda feels like a step backwards to lose them altogether. Like, imagine if everything after the Super Nintendo didn't have shoulder buttons, or if everything after the 64 went back to using the D-pad or losing rumble. Sometimes games are actually just fine without those things, but even though pointer controls are useful far less often, they do make certain games way better when it actually makes sense, in my opinion. And it's for that reason why I've been told that I'd probably like playing games on the PC. But aside from a random Command & Conquer game, I've actually never tried, which I'm sure is gonna cause a lot of piss and vinegar in the comments. As far as these Resident Evil games on the Switch are concerned, though, I think $30 is way too expensive, especially with the half-ass releases making them not definitive. So unless you absolutely have to play these games right now and don't own any other consoles, then you should just be patient. Because after most Switch games have been out for about 6 months or so, they always end up on sale in the eShop. Especially Capcom games. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised to see these games that took no effort on Capcom's part to be like $10 to $20 by the end of the year, specifically when they're trying to get some holiday sales. But I'll tell you a bundle pack that's worth far more than $60 and doesn't require a digital download, which would be today's patrons of the day, John Polish Impossible to Say and Walla Waifu. Or if you'd rather show support by picking a shirt or mug up, then send pictures or videos of you rocking it to make a cameo like these badasses right here. Anyway, what do you think about Resident Evil 4's lack of pointer and motion controls, though? What do you think about the half-and-half releases of Resident Evil 0 and 1? Do you think Capcom are being a bunch of butt pirates, or do you think I need to just sit my ass down? Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll try my goddamnedest to respond to everybody. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to see more videos like this. And if you want to help this channel grow, then simply liking and sharing goes a long way. My name's Cameron, and I'll see you next time.
So I want to say thank you to your loyalty, thank you for your support.